Hello and welcome to The Philosopher's Angle, your daily French philosophical take on the news headlines. This is an AI-generated podcast based directly on the writings of the philosophers discussed, but like all AI, it can make mistakes. In the news today, October 26, 2024, story, Israel launched airstrikes against Iran in a retaliatory attack, hitting missile manufacturing sites and aerial defenses in several areas inside Iran. The Israeli military said it completed its air attack on Saturday morning, with 3 waves of strikes completed. Iranian air defenses reported limited damage to some locations, and at least 7 explosions were reported over the capital, Tehran, and nearby cities. The U.S. did not participate in the strikes, but worked with Israel to encourage a low-risk attack with no civilian harm. The airstrikes were seen as a response to a missile barrage launched by Iran on October 1st that saw an estimated 180 ballistic missiles fired towards Tel Aviv and military bases. Commentary inspired by the writings of Slavoj Žižek. In the aftermath of Israel's retaliatory airstrikes against Iran, the world is once again confronted with the complexities of self-defense in global politics. As Slavoj Žižek would argue, the notion of self-defense is often a mere pretext for aggression, obscuring the true motives behind such actions. The recent news story serves as a stark example of how dominant ideologies can warp our perception of what constitutes a legitimate threat, and how national sovereignty can be used to justify aggressive actions towards others. Žižek's work in The Sublime Object of Ideology highlights the ideological struggle for the appropriation of universal terms that name the common interests of all humanity. In this context, Israel's airstrikes against Iran can be seen as a manifestation of this struggle, where the Israeli government seeks to justify its actions under the guise of self-defense, thereby masking its own imperialist ambitions. However, as Žižek perceptively notes in Did Somebody Say Totalitarianism? Nationalism is not just an ideology, but a way of structuring social relations that is inherently tied to racism. In this sense, Israel's actions against Iran can be seen as a form of nationalist aggression, where the Israeli state seeks to assert its dominance over another nation. But what about the role of the United States in this scenario? The fact that the U.S. did not participate directly in the airstrikes, but worked with Israel to encourage a low-risk attack with no civilian harm raises important questions about the ideology behind such actions. As Žižek would argue, we should be aware of how dominant ideologies shape our perception of reality. In this case, the U.S.'s actions can be seen as an attempt to legitimize Israel's aggression under the guise of humanitarian concern. This is precisely where Žižek's work in Defense of Lost Causes becomes relevant. He argues that we should not naively trust the dominant ideology, but rather be aware of how it shapes our perception of reality. In this context, the U.S.'s actions can be seen as an attempt to manipulate public opinion, creating a narrative that justifies Israel's aggression while obscuring its own complicity. Moreover, the fact that the airstrikes were seen as a response to a missile barrage launched by Iran on October 1st raises important questions about the concept of self-defense. As Žižek would argue, it is often difficult to distinguish between legitimate self-defense and imperialist intervention. In this case, Israel's actions can be seen as a form of preemptive strike, where the Israeli state seeks to assert its dominance over Iran under the guise of self-defense. The situation is a microcosm of the broader dynamics at play in the region, where nationalist tensions and imperialist ambitions are constantly simmering just below the surface. The airstrikes serve as a symptom of a deeper disease, one that is rooted in the complex web of ideologies and interests that shape global politics. In conclusion, the recent airstrikes by Israel against Iran serve as a prime example of how dominant ideologies can distort our perception of reality and how national sovereignty can be used to justify aggressive actions towards others. As Žižek's work so perceptively demonstrates, we must be aware of how these ideologies structure our understanding of self-defense and challenge the narratives that legitimize such actions. Ultimately, it is only by unveiling the ideology behind Israel's airstrikes that we can begin to understand the true motives behind such actions. By doing so, we may just uncover a more nuanced reality, one where the masks of self-defense are stripped away, revealing the complex web of imperialist ambitions and nationalist aggression that lies beneath. Thank you for listening to today's episode of The Philosopher's Angle. Be sure to come back tomorrow for another reflective take on the day's news.